recording in progress, and hand over to Carey to start us off this afternoon or this morning or wherever you may be.
Hi everyone, I'm wherever you are in the world. My name is Carey Walden and I'm a research student, a Master of Design and at RMIT University. And my thesis project is a ceremony of restoration. And I'm also a civil celebrant. I'm coming to you from the unceded lands of the Woiwurrung and the Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation. And I respectfully acknowledge their ancestors and elders, past and present. And I just have this slide of the bubbles because it's such a beautiful idea of bubbles. My first slide is Carey, the communicator at a young age. And I love this photo. It's just beautiful. I'm just going to read you my submission. Recently, I had a bubble moment whilst walking in Princess Park, Melbourne. I came across a heart of flowers with a sign from a group who'd suffered the loss of a child and wanted to connect with people with the same experience. I reflected on how we create temporary memorials, have conversations in public, often by people not connected to those who've met violent and unexpected deaths, as a way to express support, solidarity, comfort, and to find meaning. In secular Australia, civil celebrants such as myself are creating our own rituals, telling stories, ours and others, to build our emotional resilience and a comfort bubble amidst the uncertain times we live in. Telling the stories of and creating comfort bubbles, which may come in many forms, for a brief short shining moment is crucial in these times we live in. I was reminded by autoethnographer Arthur Bochner, write to learn to feel and make connections. What you care about matters. And that was from a lovely session with Art and Carolyn Ellis, sponsored by Monash University. And I'm very grateful for that session. Bochner asserts, we depend on stories almost as much as we depend on the air we breathe. Air keeps us alive. Stories give meaning to our existence. As autoethnographers, our stories are grounded in our own lived experience and our relationships, which we portray in our written words, song, and performance. And that's a quote from Stacey Holman Jones. So my creative research project, A Ceremony of Restoration, is experimental, using myself autoethnographically as a subject to create a bubble of comfort, unlocking the door to memories held tightly within me. It exposes memories, secrets, and stories which have crippled my dysfunctional family. Making bubbles of all kinds is what I'm doing in my ceremony. My stories, poetry, and music, to give meaning, healing, and mending in the wake of traumatic, chaotic, and unresolved events I've experienced in my family. And the ceremony can be used by the person or people at its center to give that expression to such experiences and feelings, to build the resilience. And through this ritual involving these stories, memories, images, personal artifacts, and music, I've created a comfort bubble using sashiko, which is a Japanese textile process of visible mending and repair used to underpin my ceremony of restoration, to acknowledge and make visible our grief and trauma. Sashiko guides the ceremony as a ritual for visibly engaging and stitching together the layers of people's lived experience, to give that validation and a process for grief, to create a comfort in a bubble of time and space. An autoethnographic approach with me as a subject and this innovative ceremony model is to support the well-being of individuals, families, and society. There is this duality of the observer and observed, the insider, the outsider, the family member, the celebrant, the client, vulnerable me, at the center, bubbles within bubbles. And this is this zooming in and zooming out that Tammy Spry talks about. With grief, not necessarily death. We're expected to deal with our loss and feelings and then just move on in our life. As a celebrant trained in pastoral care, I help people to process this grief by creating this comfort bubble of a ceremony, and that is meaningful to them. And it draws upon my own experiences of life, loss, and my civil celebrant practice, which is an under-researched role in Australia. So I've written a poem called Comfort Bubble. Create a moment of comfort and warmth, holding you in my arms, knowing the world is waiting just outside the door. Stay this moment in our circle of comfort, safe in our bubble, wrapped in warmth. Being an autographer, the vulnerable me at the center of the ceremony of restoration means I have those unique insights about my family, how they think, act, and co-author their social worlds, as Tony Adams says. There are also unique questions I can raise that would not be possible by another research lens, because I'm both the participant and observer. Adams says, autographers use reflexivity to make explicit personal and cultural connections to critique cultural issues. There is power in story to stretch, to heal, to transform. And how I tell my stories by ceremony performance is a way to acknowledge grief, loss, and the process to visibly heal and repair in bubbles of care. Psychotherapist Frances Wallow declares that ritual provides us with something else that we deeply need, a level of witnessing that truly enables us to be seen. And this is what ceremony can do. A sharing at deep level can be powerful and gives us visibility and a voice for both ourselves and others to create a space bubble. Events in our world, disruption, tragedy, trauma, loss, death, and destruction can leave us breathless, speechless, shaken and stunned. And celebrant and psychotherapist Jelty Gordon-Lennox points out that our world is dislocated and we have a need for connection and others. Amid the pain and loss, bubble moments of comfort and connection are strongly needed, such as when a young graduate committed suicide. Death of the young cohort of graduates was confronting and they didn't know what to do. And they were there at the funeral and the gathering beforehand to tell each other what we knew of this young man with so much ahead of him, who was in so much pain, losing his beloved mother to cancer. I was glad to help them create a bubble of support and comfort. The death of a young person, one we all knew, was shocking. The hardest part for us all was when the body was interred in the ground and our arms went around each other as we cried and mourned the loss. There are so many situations where we need to create these comfort bubbles. People have survived cancer, who've died in armed conflict, the Westminster Bridge attack in London in 2017, the Lind Cafe siege, Sydney, 2014, and the bushfires in Australia, 2019 to 2020. These are spaces for us to reflect and to share our feelings, to know we're not alone, and to also look at, as we've seen in the commemoration of World War I, sharing of war experiences and commemoration as a desire to produce a common understanding of the past. Given the current world pandemic of COVID-19, there would be more times of coming together to remember and require thoughtful construction, such as those voices who are heard and the context. For me, the ordinary person's voice needs to come forward more than ever in our world. My ceremony of restoration is based on two stories of loss of my two siblings, Adrian and Diane, and they both died in Los Angeles in 1988 and 2003. These are stories of ordinary people, my family. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit about Diane's story. So in 2002, I discovered that Diane was dying in Los Angeles. She had no intention of telling any of us, but I stayed connected and persisted. The years of flying as a flight attendant with Ansett Airlines and Qantas had taken their toll because cigarette smoking was allowed and had a serious effect on her lungs. And this photo is showing her at graduation. She's second on the right. It was like a recurring nightmare to me because another one of my siblings was dying in Los Angeles. And luckily, we had cousins, David and Jeannie, who lived in Beverly Hills. But it was a surreal experience visiting my sister in the Scientology compound in Hollywood, driving down Sunset Boulevard, getting lost in Beverly Hills, and taking Diane down to our cousin's Malibu beach house, previously belonging to Steve McQueen and Ali McGraw. We're in the heart of movie stars' colony. That time was precious, and a comfort bubble encircled us, whilst we reflected on our parents' toxic and degenerating relationship and the deep unhappiness in our family, where emotions were repressed and secrets kept. When Diane died, her ashes were scattered at Malibu in the Pacific Ocean between the United States and Australia, a fitting end. And here she is at Malibu Beach and that lovely time we had together. Sometimes treasures tell us so much about people. And this is a photo of my sister Diane's Toy Mice family. So this was her family bubble. So wherever she traveled, she would take them with her. And that was part of her family bubble, because we both wished that we had a normal family, and it just wasn't. So using the Japanese concept of sashiko, visible mending with visible stitches, we can acknowledge the imperfection of life and ourselves. Our minds and our bodies have scars, invisible and visible. In my practice as a civil celebrant, creating ceremonies and ritual, I work with people who want to actively seek processes to acknowledge their scars and find comfort in sashiko bubbles of visible mending. Our minds and bodies have scars invisible and visible. With my ceremony of restoration, I've created a comfort bubble for myself and I hope others. Leonard Cohen's song Anthem reminds us there is a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in. Making our grief and trauma visible can let the light in to acknowledge to ourselves and others, to find a comfort in the bubble of light. And then I've just finished with bubbles, shining bubbles floating in the air, filled with stories, love and air, gleaming through bubbles, love and care, ephemeral and short, but there. Thank you.
Thank you, Carey. If everyone could just have a look down everyone could just have a look. Carey, can you stop sharing your screen?
Yep, sorry. There we go.
Thank you. Everyone could just have a look down the bottom there at the reactions and share some applause, share some love.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Carey. And we might have time for questions for the panel at the end, but second on our list today is Eleanor. So welcome, Eleanor. Whether it's early morning or afternoon or late in the night, but welcome, and over to you.
It's early morning. Welcome to Dawn in Cambridge. I will just share my screen. Just 1 second.
Is that Charlie?
Just need to get the PowerPoint started. Sorry, this is going to work. I just have to already have it, I think, on presenter view. Okay, can you see that?
That's great, Eleanor. We can see the title slide, and there's one person on a cello, one person on a violin, and two people in the background. So I think we're seeing that whole picture.
That's absolutely right. Okay, thank you so much. So thanks for having me this morning, well, this afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you. My name's Eleanor Ryan, and I'm just finishing the first year of my PhD at the University of Cambridge in the Faculty of Education. And my PhD is exploring decolonising pedagogies of higher music education, particularly looking at classical music education. But I've entitled my talk today, Bursting Bubbles of Coloniality in Higher Music Education. My violin sits in its open case. The golden amber-hued grains on its face run in tiny rivulets down its body. These narrow lines, stripes of gold, the repeating waves of tree life are like lines of empty manuscript waiting to be written. The back and ribs, which give the face a fleshed-out body, flicker with holographic flames. Where my hands have habitually held the instrument, the varnish is dulled, polished away with use. The violin is an archive of affects, of sound, touch, memory, environment, epistemic noise, relational performance, and onto-epistemological orientations. It is a material body imprinted with my body, which has shaped and directed my body, the performance of my life, and my societal relations through music. The violin bears witness to the self and to the social. The thinking and feeling about this project began when my plane touched down in Trinidad and Tobago back in 2009, and I, Eleanor, white, middle-class and cisgendered woman from Whanganui-a-Tara, Wellington, where I was raised on the lands of Te Aotearoa, New Zealand, emerged into the Caribbean heat, violin case in hand, leaving the life I had built as an orchestral musician and teacher in the UK behind me. I carried within me a deep knowledge of the Western classical canon and the pedagogies through which to pass this knowledge on to others. I arrived with a group of white musicians, guests of the Trinidadian government. We were asked to be founding members of a new professional symphony orchestra and faculty members of a new higher music education institution in Trinidad. I did not know at the time, but I would stay living and working on the island for the next 9 years. And this is a picture of me from when I first arrived in Trinidad back in 2009. It was in Trinidad that I began to become aware of my whiteness and of coloniality as a force for the first time, explicitly connected with my identity as a violinist. It was a powerfully disorientating awareness which I immediately felt, but which was also called out by others. You teach the violin? Hey, you're teaching white people music, eh? And I reacted very defensively, felt a physical zipping up as I swatted this representation away. And yet, when I reflected, I realized it was true. My life up to that point had been seeped in whiteness, a musical space almost completely white in its social makeup, and male and white in its canon. My whiteness was, to quote Sarah Ahmed, a what which cohered as a world. When much later on I read Bell Hooks' essay on overcoming white supremacy, I felt my breath catch in my throat at Hooks' imperative that there was, and I quote, a need for righteous white people to begin to fully explore the way white supremacy determines how they see the world, even as their actions are not informed by the type of racial prejudice that promotes overt discrimination and separation. Over 9 years of Trinidad-based teaching and performing, questions around the intersection of white and musician and coloniality continuously bubble to the surface with an urgency, and they continue to do so for me. To what extent was our presence in Trinidad an embodiment of whiteness and coloniality in music education, masquerading as a neutral, global, and universal cultural practice? What might articulations between coloniality and the notion of liberal humanism say about the training of performers and composers in the Western classical tradition? And what might decolonizing pedagogies be and become in this space? Given the bubble analogy of this conference, I want to focus on one particular aspect of whiteness and coloniality which emerged from my autoethnographic research thus far, which was the sense of containment and boundary drawing which enables whiteness to be maintained in Western classical music. And how this emerges is what post-human theorist Karen Barad calls a material discursive force, where, and I quote Barad here, neither discursive practices nor material phenomena are ontologically prior, but utterly entangled. So language and practice are equally important in forming and maintaining ways of being. I think critical autoethnography is one powerful approach to explore this material discursivity, because of what philosopher of race George Yancey calls the density and dramaturgy of racialization, how the process of racialization is lived and enacted within, and this is a quote, embodied spaces of social transaction filled with rituals, spoken words, silences, grimaces, reactions, signs and symbols, body gestures, gazes, projections, denials, myths, and complex emotions. My critical autoethnographic process, which I carried out for an MPhil dissertation, which I finished last year, aimed to take on board Stacey Holman-Jones' suggestion that theory and story work together in a dance of collaborative engagement. For me, spaces, emotions, images, snippets of conversation, embodied memories, and even dream sequences emerged connected to my professional life as a musician as I read and reread theories of racialization and coloniality. These led to recollections of the intensities and forces passing between bodies. These affective memories emerge as important indications of the intersections of the material discursive nature of musicianship with the psychosocial nature of racialization. In analysing my writing, I found the theoretical concept of autopoiesis, which comes from the Jamaican decolonial theorist Silver Winter, really useful. Autopoiesis describes the replication of recursive discourse and practice, which creates and sustains a self-referential and bounded social system of living. Autopoiesis names the process by which social systems sustain their overarching frameworks, boundaries and containments, such as the containments that Morrison speaks about on the slide here, like a fishbowl, which enable their realization. It's a system which realizes itself through the process of recursion. In other words, I continue to repeat what I have always already done and believed because it sustains the world which I have created and the world which creates me. Autopoiesis can be applied as an analytical concept to understand racial and racist rankings and groupings and taxonomies of humans. The term can be utilized to explore the ways in which an autopoietic logic informs a looping recursiveness which normalizes and naturalizes white supremacy and coloniality within educational and academic disciplines. Autopoiesis enables us to analyze how the practice of being human is relational to and embedded in a living system that replicates itself, and in this replicates what it means to be human according to the parameters of the existing social system. I now want to share with you a short excerpt of autoethnographic writing, which I think speaks to the material discursive nature of boundary drawing, autopoiesis, acting through classical music pedagogies. So I've entitled this piece, The White Female Violinist Teaching in Trinidad. I teach a young woman of mixed Trinidadian heritage. Time and energy pours out of me into her development. Lines blur, and in lessons it sometimes feels as if she is an extension of me and I perform through her. We work towards her dream of a master's degree in America. We practice jumping the hoops she must jump and barriers she must leap to gain access to good institutions in the West. My student submits herself to me to be crafted, sculpted, and advised. I embody the correct corporeal schema of the classical violinist, its familiar shape and gestures. I'm imprinting this into her. She trusts me completely, a trust expressed in gratitude and diligent practice. I listen through my eyes. I study her body with close attention, its gait, its centers of gravity, its imbalances. She is continually subjected to my gaze. My student and I struggle to shape and master her body into a body which convinces in gesture and sound, so that Bach remains sublime and Brahms a sight of unfurling triumphant transcendence. These canons are the altars to which all proper violinists must submit. She does everything she can, willing her body to move and be in ways that I will recognize, that will pass the judgment of the institution, which is not just our institution, but has the weight of European cultural history and American university entrance pressing onto it. I carry the heavy weight of this on my shoulders and glance anxiously across the Atlantic, seeking nods of approval for my work, back from somewhere, a gaze back from nowhere. My eyes, my learning, my body, orientated always back towards Europe. I push her body towards the north, trade winds at our backs. I break the motions down again. Shoulder first, then forearm, then elbow, then wrist, in that order, repeat. Her joints disarticulated through logic. I hear her sound, which is her voice, the voice of a young black Caribbean woman, and it's my ears and my eyes which are ordering it, making it self-conscious, adjusting, fixing, striving. I mold her into me, fold her into me, judging her as I judge myself, as my institution judges me. Our bodies neutral, a form of cultural blank slate that belongs nowhere. My white female teaching body presents itself as the universal musician human sight, but whose body is imprinted into me? The somatic gestures of the Western man, reproduced in music semiotics. I found this piece very difficult to write because I was deeply troubled by the sense of contortion it expressed, the unnatural parceling of a student's performance into predetermined and approved boxes shaped around white bodies and white aesthetics. I noticed the privileging of the well-being of the canon over student well-being and the dominant hegemonic gaze of the Western Academy over everything that we did. I also realized the extent to which my own coloniality had become entangled with the student's musical development. The violin lesson emerges as a space of immense vulnerability for the student. Relational contact between teacher and student is a site of action, where the teacher has powerful agency, shaping habits in the student body. It is the intensity of repetitious habits in the one-to-one space that enables this. Time and repetition have autopoietic impact. The interiority of habits become the embodiment of an aesthetic. What commands the attention of teacher and student is a task at hand, but what trails behind? Sarah Ahmed theorizes that within the white institution, whiteness trails, unseen behind sites of action. Whiteness is, and I quote, what is behind the action and the habit. My classroom was full of bodily performance, but also an intensely focused white gaze. Black thinkers, W.E.B. Du Bois and Frantz Fanon, have conceptualized the double consciousness of the oppressive white gaze, a racializing power which arrests the black body, making itself strange to itself. Small gestures, microaggressions, a grimace or a raised eyebrow serve to mark the superiority of the white body, while simultaneously othering those to whom the gesture is thrown. My violin teacher gaze operates here as a fine delineating laser beam, dividing wholeness into mind-body separation. This writing helped me understand my body and gaze as haunted by the inheritances of the male gaze of my own teacher. I began to understand how I was modeling him and that this model was not benign, The insidious nature of white supremacy is such that black bodies are only afforded entry to the white institution if those black bodies think, act, share values, and to all intents and purposes behave as white bodies. My autoethnographic writing exposes impositions of control of body, mind, and spirit through an inherited white supremacy I had not been aware I was embodying. Behind a facade of teaching neutral musical skills, I constructed a teaching identity where I became, in the classroom, a saviour, a cheerleader, and a gatekeeper rolled into one. The black female musical body of my student became a site of my controlling gaze, behind which gathers a colonial epistemic violence, which disciplines and holds bodies in containment. To finish, I want to return, as I started, to the violin. I entered into this research thinking about performance, what the violinist and the musical pedagogue performs, what these performances represent or reflect, and how the recursiveness of these performances shape an embodied ontology, a way of being in the world. Thus, I'm drawn to the embodied performativity of autoethnography, an opportunity to performatively enact a critical, ethical witnessing of my performances with the help of theory, striving towards a rigorous reflexivity and generosity in storytelling of life, relations, and my situatedness in systems of power and privilege. I see autoethnography as functioning like an alternative instrument to my violin, a second instrument. But here it acts as a verb, to instrument, which in musical terms means to score or compose. I see autoethnography as performative, as performed reflexive process, mapping life and theory together as an interwoven texture, and performative in a post-human sense in that it can express the performativity of entanglements of body, technology, and discourse, the material discursive. My present research is speculatively seeking out situated, contingent, and relational decolonizing pedagogies, which might act to burst rigid bubbles of classical music ontological aesthetics. The instrument and the body become central to the praxial nature of decolonizing methodologies, a praxial performativity, which grounds theory within practice and practice within theory. The praxis moves in thinking, doing loops. I want to leave you all with a final image of performative defiance from one of my students, which I think bursts the bubble of colonial containment we were imposing on her. This student decided to perform a solo work by J.S. Bach, but instead of performing it in the concert hall as part of her recital, she instead performed a moving promenade, dancing her audience into the recital theatre from an outside space. She did so in defiance of the string faculty, who had denied her permission on the basis that it did not hold her performance in place as an object which could be measured using the standard rubric. The memory of this decolonizing moment emerged suddenly in my autoethnographic writing, a memory I had forgotten, but which re-emerged through a decolonizing lens as a performative decolonizing praxis. Thanks very much. There's my references.
Wow, that was amazing work, Eleanor. Thank you not just for sharing, but for the work that you're doing. It's just it's great. Everyone just has a look down at your reactions button and shares a little heart, a little clap, thumb, a bit of a party. What else is there? In my background, you might hear that a thunderstorm is sitting over the top of Brisbane at the moment. So I'm hoping I'll be able to host through till 5 o'clock. But in the event that I shut down, I apologise. There are some people on standby ready to jump in and take over the hosting duties. We will cycle back and do questions with Carey and Eleanor soon. But for now, Marc, welcome. I think it's probably early morning where you are as well. So, or are you in Melbourne, Marc?
I'm in Singapore, actually.
Oh, well.
Yeah. It's 2:30 p.m. here.
I hope you enjoyed your lunch, getting ready for afternoon tea. And for now, we'll hand over to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marc.
Okay. So good afternoon from Singapore, where a thunderstorm is also brewing. My name is Academic Marc, and why I call myself that will be revealed in a moment. My PhD research at RMIT University explores a personal shift in worldview from Christian evangelical belief through to atheism through the use of performance autoethnography as a means of creative practice research. It is, for me, it has been a giant needle that has popped a very large bubble. I have adopted the use of performance autoethnography in the form of a liturgy as dissertation called the Self-Portrait Service to creatively embody, critique, and subvert hegemonic expressions of faith and to document this processual development of unfaithing. But autoethnography was not my first choice of research methodology. I came upon it through a search for a form that would fit this story that I'm telling using the various tools of my trade. So the Self-Portrait Service as dissertation incorporates a variety of forms, including poetry, spoken word, and memoir. It splits the self of Marc into six performing and practicing selves as a means to interrogate the effects of a change in worldview on a diverse writing practice. I call this change an unfaithing. So what is unfaithing? It is a process of removing faith and belief from the self. It is the opposite of the function of the church. On screen, you'll see this verse, which notes that you yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. And in the dissertation, the self is led through familiar elements of a Christian service, such as an opening prayer, communal reading, sermon, and there are even 4 Sunday school styled breakout rooms. And using various performative elements of creative practice, each element is defamiliarized, satirized, and repurposed to show how this loss of faith is accomplished. So who are the 6 selves of Marc? Let me introduce them to you. This is a still from my PhD exam video, which is going to happen in a few weeks' time. So I thought it was most appropriate here. From right to left, Memoir Marc's accounts of experiences of growing up as an evangelical, charismatic Christian have become the raw material for the memoir excerpts referenced in the breakout rooms. Academic Marc, me, makes sense of the creative outputs of the various Marcs through critical reflexivity, drawing on the tools of performance autoethnography. Satirical Marc frames portions of the liturgy as satire, subverting it through various genres of production, as the aim of this liturgy is to demonstrate a shift in creative practice and not to send up Christianity per se. Poetic Marc has come to develop a different way of seeing, demonstrated by the transition in theme and content from his early poems to later poems. Performance Marc presents the performative self of Marc as a spoken word artist and in multidisciplinary collaborations with other artists on various stages. Christian Marc speaks as a Christian throughout, maintaining a counterpoint to the other voices. His stance does not change. Christian Marc is the other to all the other Marcs. He is probably praying in tongues somewhere for the other Marcs to come back to the Lord. And presenting all the practicing Marcs in one space as separate selves that are deeply intertwined also demonstrates how each aspect of and approach to practice can respond to and learn from the others. So the self-portrait service parallels the structure of the Christian service in form, but not in its intent. Rather than unify and bring the body into communion with a higher power, the service dismantles the notion of a singular self/Marc into multiple bubbles, selves of Marc who are no longer anchored to a unified vision or view of the world. Unifying the Marcs within this one space, the self-portrait service gestures towards a reconstituted self that is more attuned to the variety of ways that practice can help one to shape and understand the world. And of course, writing 6 different selves could sometimes get a little schizophrenic, especially when some speak in first person, others in the third person. And it was kind of important to map out how each of them had a different character arc. In that sense, the breakout rooms were critical to developing the selves and motivations for 4 of the Marcs, accepting academic Marc, who tied everything together, and Christian Marc. So which traced the development of each Marc from pre-PhD and then looking at a creative practice that emanated when the turn to unfaithing occurred. And so, and I really hope this plays properly, because I wanted to offer a sense of what the dissertation could look like performed. And I have pre-recorded the other selves of Marc who are speaking from different parts of the self-portrait service. So let's see whether this works. If you can't hear, please let me know. Thank you.
The title of this breakout room is Born Again, Intervene and Invent, because I believe that by becoming unfaith, I have indeed been born again to see the world in a different way, not framed by the faith of my childhood. Satire has helped to open up an intervening space for critical thought and response, the practice of new ways of looking, based on Marc's history of faith, is also part of that process and practice. To that end, to open this breakout room is a passage from Memoir Marc, which offers a story about Marc's involvement as a child in the Royal Rangers, a Christian version of the Scouts. We tried our best to make this whole Wild West thing work, though. When I was 13 years old, we went on a 3-day hike from the center of the island, starting at the Singapore Island Country Club, working our way across the reservoirs and nature reserves until we emerged much further north at Choa Chu Kang. The end point was a McDonald's. I don't remember the exact route, except that we camped illegally beside a reservoir, warmed up tins of canned food and cooked instant noodles over a campfire. What we did then would be impossible to do today. Singapore in the 1990s was a lot less regulated and developed than it is now. I suppose that was the closest we could come to being an urban ranger, although just like a Native American, I frequently felt like I was an outsider because of my race. During Royal Ranger meetings, there were frequent conversations in Mandarin, not intentionally, but simply out of habit. These casual acts of exclusion were perhaps most telling of the lack of acceptance, grace, and Christian values, or simply that culture is a stronger force than faith could ever be. There was rarely any attempt to reconcile our immediate environment with what we were learning in the Royal Rangers. We lived in a tropical climate, in a city-state with very strict bylaws regarding camping and starting fires in the open. We had no prairie or mountain ranges. We were not white men who had come to displace and destroy the lands and lifestyle of Native Americans. Our forefathers, who chafed under the hand of colonizers, came here to work as coolies and laborers, rarely rising up beyond the middle class. Memoir as text, as context, as point of analysis, as reflective reflex, as flexion of action, as is, as was, as I am between, fluid and full of experience, a sight of tension, pretension, when intent was to be as he is, when to be is ongoing, to remember is to hold the core up to light with feet on the earth, is to be related to all things, is the doing of undoing, of being, is to be in step with all.
So thank you for watching 3 of the Marcs. We'll have 2 more coming up shortly. And I just want to introduce the next prayer, which parodies the Christian mealtime prayer. And it's situated as part of a larger section that is a series of suggested responses to different scenarios that might be encountered by an atheist who is in the company of Christians.
The non-religious mealtime prayer. To all the gods who have existed before us, to those who are even now bursting into being like kernels of popcorn in a toaster, I thank you. The matter at hand is this table of food before us. Usually, we will ask whichever God we believe in to bless it, but clearly they don't have much of any role to play. So instead, let us thank the composted, well-aerated soil for bringing these vegetables to life, the rolling hills wherein these steaks have come from, where cows have been fed free-range, whole-grain meals and attended a meditation circle every day. Yes, we thank them all. Shall I go on? I shall. Let us thank the makers of our enamel plates, our cutlery, the tablecloth, the very table we are eating on, sourced from a vintage store or online. Yes, let us not forget our Nordic-inspired chairs. May we be blessed by this confluence of circumstances that has enabled us to partake of the food that we see. Let it be good for us. Let it be good to us, that we may be good people in return, ruminating with every mouthful on the sacrifices that have been made, so that we may eat in peace and prosperity, love and light. How dare you make light of prayer and of these sacred rituals and words that define who I am? These phrases, I have been praying for you. God's grace, it's a miracle. It must be the hand of God, so blessed, a part of the songbook of my faith. These simple words that I reach for when faced with something beyond the immediate logic of my experience. They become ways in which I express my belief. These words of comfort pulled from Scripture and repeated by a fellow community of believers. This is the language of faith that frames my world. The trust that there is a higher power at play in my life, that bad things, cruelty, war, senseless violence, and even natural disasters are a result of sin that has made this world fallen.
Thank you for watching. And I do apologize for Christian Marc. He can be quite a handful. This conference comes at the perfect time for me, actually. It's between having submitted my dissertation and before my final examination. So it is in many ways finished for the purposes of the PhD, but the work of unfaithing the self is an ongoing one. Viewing the self through Tammy Spry's formulation of the unsettled I, my story has gone back and forth between time periods, states of belief and unbelief, polyvocal selves, and genres of creative practice. Beginning with the epiphany of a loss of faith, I developed a body of work that jostled to what Norman Denzin has called the sting of memory, fashioning episodes that define my experiences via 6 subjective selves as lenses. This multiple sense of the I can also be seen as a form of transformative thinking, and it mirrors what Alastair Pennycook offers when he asks, how does my research writing produce a writing subject in a certain way? In this liturgy, the multidisciplinary approach allows me to come at the question and practice of writing beyond faith in different ways, as you have seen. I have been able to test my unfaithed voice with new performative tools and to demonstrate how the autoethnographic representation of an unfaithing might engage not just audiences who have undergone similar religious experiences and who are unable to articulate an undoing of their own beliefs, but also creative practitioners who want to explore the affordances of dialogic selves, multiple unsettled eyes, in response to different experiences of life and or practice. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this symbol. It represents the concept of Sankofa from the Asante Twi language of the Akan people of Western Africa. And he depicts a mythical bird flying forward with its head turned backward. The egg in its mouth represents the gems or knowledge of the past upon which wisdom is based. It also signifies a generation to come that would benefit from that wisdom. The Sankofa symbol is associated with a proverb which translates to, it is not wrong to go back for that which you have forgotten. And that is what I have tried to do in my research and in my practice of unfaithing. Thank you.
Thank you, Marc. Just love the dialogue and the different points of view and the way that you've set that up. It's fascinating, fabulous. Yes, let's have a look down at the reactions bar and make sure that we share some love, share some applause. And we probably have about 5 minutes or so until we start meeting up with some people who are going to drop in here to do the making session. So we'll just throw it open. Would anyone have any questions? Carey, Eleanor, if you want to unmute yourselves and be ready to answer away.
Can I ask Eleanor a question? I just wondered how you felt coming back to the UK, and I would say you're probably now playing in orchestras again, you know, after that experience in Trinidad, because like I have a pretty good understanding of orchestras because I had a close connection to the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. So I was just interested to hear.
Funnily enough, I've got a close connection to the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra as well.
You know, there you go, connection.
Yeah. Well, actually, I've got to be honest with you. When I came back to the UK, I actually felt like I couldn't go back into orchestras. I have done a little bit of orchestral playing since, but I actually found it suffocating. And in fact, I couldn't quite work out where I fitted anymore in the UK in the music scene, because it is very sort of boundaried, and it's quite difficult to move. If you're inside the classical bubble, it's very difficult to move outside of it. To do so, well, basically you can, but to do so requires a kind of a stepping out on one's own, like a very brave, to be sort of very much kind of seeking out new ways of being, which means leaving certain kind of safe spaces behind.
Safe but suffocating.
Yeah, suffocating. Like, yeah. I mean, sorry, it's just a very short analogy, but I went back to London with my Trinidadian partner, and I was very excited because I wanted to introduce him to the Wigmore Hall, which is this famous space for chamber music. And I hadn't been there for about 8 years or something like that. So he came with me, and I just was shocked by it. It was like I suddenly saw the space. It was just a very, very, very white, very middle class, very upper middle class space. He was the only black man in the room, and the sort of various behaviours going on with just suddenly seemed very strange to me, and so I'm still kind of trying to work through all of that. But yeah.
Yeah, it's very difficult when you have someone who is a coloured person and you're white, and then there's all white in the room, if you know what I mean. I mean,
the white racialized space.
Sorry.
Well, the white racialized space.
Yeah.
We don't think of it as racialized, but it is a racialized space.
Yeah. So, I've noticed that.
Yeah.
Oh, Eleanor, have you found ways to play? Okay, you've gone back to a bit of orchestra now, but have you found other ways or places to play that you do feel comfortable in?
Yeah, I have. Well, I mean, before I left Trinidad, I was increasingly doing lots and lots of sort of lots of work with local musicians in Trinidad. So I've been involved with creating albums with them, and also so I've been working with spoken word artists. I've been working with actors. The work that I'm doing more at the moment is actually working in theatre. So and a lot more sort of improvisation. I tend to, like in my own practice, I tend to try to sort of improvise every day rather than just recreate, just keep practicing the same canon that I always had. But it's very challenging, particularly as a teacher. I teach violin a lot, and there's an enormous amount of pressure as a teacher to just keep on doing it the way it's done, like, you know, to do the ABRSM exams, and that's what people really want. So it's very difficult to sort of find a space to try other things in the UK anyway. Yeah.
It's a bit like that in the classical music scene in Australia, but at least there is some space. Like jazz is usually accepted, that if they, you know, play jazz, that's accepted, but difficult space.
The boundaries of genres are really, really sort of strange and conservative. Actually, I was thinking, I wanted to just say to Marc, I just absolutely loved this piece that you just presented. It's amazing. And I was thinking like the fluidity with which you move through all these different voices. It's like something that I feel like I could really learn from, actually. And I wondered, like, how free is it for you to move between these different characters? Are they all, do you feel like they're all facets, or did you have to create some of them?
Well, I think when I started my PhD, I was looking at ekphrasis. So I was very far away from all of this. And autoethnography really came in maybe like a year ago. And then I just found that I couldn't like express everything I wanted. My background is poetry. So I've been a poet and I've like written a lot of poetry books, but I started writing a memoir, and then I realized the voice in the memoir was kind of different. And then I let the voices lead me. I also have a history of doing spoken word on stage, and then that became like a performance mark. And then there's genre, and then there's also like a way of being. So I've written satire with in terms of comedy in Singapore for something else for many years. So I just ran with that natural division of creative selves, and just allowed I guess in a way it's like writing a novel. You allow characters to breathe themselves into being, and they have their own arcs, and then you just let them grow. I think that's how it happened. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Folks, it's now getting close to 2 minutes before this session comes to an end. Stacey has already taken away my hosting rights, and so she might need to stop the recording very soon. But I just would like to thank Eleanor, Marc, and Carey for 3 wonderful presentations this morning, this afternoon, tonight, whatever time zone you might be in. That it really was 3 fine examples of evocative, vulnerable, liminal, creative autoethnography. So thank you very much for your contributions. They were just wonderful. And on that note, Stacey, I'm going to hand over to you to stop the recording and do whatever else you might like to do.
Yeah, great. Hi, everybody. Thank you for those wonderful presentations. So in order to segment off the recording, I'm going to rudely kick everyone out of this Zoom room so that we can do that. So I'm going to end the meeting, and then please just log right back on, and then we'll be here with Craig to do our making workshop with song. Okay? So if you need to pop out and get something to drink and use the facilities, come right back. We'll see you soon.